Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. My name is John Ruddy. I'm that dentist guy. I'm with Mike Abernathy. He's the dentist guy. We're going to come up at you today. I know that we're starting the new year. Every year, in the beginning, January, I'd say most people are going, what am I going to do? Maybe you made some personal goals. Maybe you made some practice goals. But today we want to kind of give you an insight on like what's most important. Like what do we need to do to really achieve our goals for next year? And so just a little introduction for myself. I've been in dentistry, thanks to Mike, for about 15 years now. And I've been to 36 different states and partnered with dentists all over. And I've had these conversations. We've gone through the steps. We've looked at the KPIs, if you will, or the metrics that matter most. We've walked through the steps of how to improve each of those things. And so it's been my pleasure, along with Mike, to do that. And just for those of you who don't know Mike, okay, maybe you're watching this, you're like, well, of course I know Mike. And if you've been around the dentistry long enough, you're like, yeah, of course, yeah. But for those of you who don't, Mike was he was doing things that most dentists weren't doing back in the 80s, the 70s, 80s and 90s. Started producing $6 million around that 80, 90 mark. But the point is that he was able to not only be a great dentist, and I want to tell a story about you in a minute. And he's like, I don't tell him stories about me, but I'm gonna do it anyways. But a couple things stood out, especially when I started in dentistry. First of all, I had no experience in dentistry, so everything I learned from Mike, I learned from a good friend Max, and my parents. They were in the dental industry as well. And but a few things stood out was that most dentists don't come out of school having a business acumen. They weren't taught, and especially this day and age, you're not really taught, well, how do I run a business? Like, what does that look like? What would it look like if I were to be profitable? How would I save for my retirement? How would I hire? All of those things. You're not really coming out with that, but Mike excelled in those things. He did a great job of putting together teams of people that really drove the practice. He always talked about doctor-led, team-driven, all right? And so he was able to do those things. But one of the stories I want to tell about him is something, and the reason I'm saying this is because I came across a lot of people that they go, well, what did Mike do? Like, what did he do in his practice? And I would call Mike and say, hey, Mike, well, what did you do in your practice? And he'd say, well, you don't want to share that. they wouldn't be able to do what I did. And so we would talk about with these doctors a little bit about their timing, and that may be an issue for you. But I watch a lot of reels about Michael Jordan, LeBron, well, not LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Tom Brady, all of these excellent athletes. And one of the things that's beat into my head as I look at these, the GOATs, if you will, or the ones that the elite, right, is the repetitions they put in to actually honing in their craft. And one of the stories that Mike told, I don't know if you told it on stage, or maybe you and I were talking, probably on stage somewhere. But you're talking about every day during your lunch break, you would take the extracted teeth and you would go do a root canal because you wanted to get better at root canals. And so you get in there, and so many of you, I would say, if you're just starting out in dentistry, or maybe you've done it for a while, most dentists are doing a root canal in, I'd say, about an hour, hour and a half, if you're good. Some of you are wasting 2 or 3 hours doing a root canal because you just want to do it. And he could do his in what, 20, 30 minutes, something like that. And people are, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you do that? Well, repetition is a big thing. And so again, I wanted to share that story because, Mike, you not only built a big practice, but you're in that group of, I would say, elite athletes, if you will, that like you see something that you really want, and you're like, I'm not just gonna like wish for it. I'm gonna go do the work and do it. And you and I were just talking about how you would invite yourself to dental practices all over. You would listen to these speakers on stage, and they would tout their strategies or whatever, and you'd say, hey, I'd love to go see your practice. And I'm sure for them, they'd be like, well, yeah, of course you want to see my practice. You just heard me on stage, right? And you'd show up only to realize, and not for all of them, but some of them, you're like, oh, wow, I'm actually doing more or better in many areas because you're honing in your craft. And I think it's, how many doctors invited themselves to your practice over the years? This is kind of a side note, but how many doctors?
About 2 a week.
About 2 a week. All right. So for a long, so there was a couple, but how many thousands and doctors are out there that you talk to? Now, we want to get into a little bit today, and we'll get to it in a minute. Like, what is the what are the main indicators in our practice? Like, how do we get clear on our current reality, right? We'll get to that in a second, okay? But Mike, you are a student for life, right?
Yep.
And student of all things, not just dentistry. I think one of the pitfalls that I see a lot of dentists getting into is they're only looking in dental industry stuff, trying to figure out how to get better.
Right.
But Mike has taken courses with Disney and Neiman Marcus and just all these different, just super successful businesses because he knows that, well, you got to get good ideas, not just dental ideas. You got to get good ideas, right? But as you're looking into 2025, I'm just curious, what would you say is something that dentists ought to pay attention to? Primarily the dentist that maybe owns their practice, but dentists that are just wanting to improve. What are some things that you see in 2025 that they really need to focus on or pay attention to as they make their goals and as they look at their practice? What do you think?
Well, I thought it was funny when you first started talking, you were very optimistic about the new year and setting goals and stuff. And most doctors, I would say that's probably the case, but they have a CPA that sends them a profit and loss statement that doesn't get there for about 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
So by February, instead of oh yeah, it's, oh crap. It's like, how bad was that as I reflect back? And I said, one of the things I think you should be doing is to diagnose your own practice. Now, when I say diagnose, I'm talking about looking at it, because it's hard to look at your own shortcomings. I mean, I have that problem too. But if you were to look at your practice like you were going to buy it, okay, I mean, you look at it very critically. Like, and I'm not just buying any old crappy practice. I want a good practice to buy. And you start looking at that, there are some KPIs, some numbers, some things that you need to look at. And most probably, they're not going to be numbers that most people tell you to look at in a dental practice. Now, I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but it kind of brings to mind, I still have people, we're doing a Zoom meeting and they flash this yellow card.
Yeah.
Okay. And they flash this yellow card. I don't even know if I have one here. Let me.
I know I've had several of them.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I have. Oh, here's one right here. There you go.
Yeah.
Go. Hey, I still got this.
Yeah.
Now, back in the day, it was cardboard.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's plastic. And what's interesting, even over 40 years, the percentages that are on this card have not changed. Now,
That's interesting.
I mean, do you understand that? Like, if we were talking about this, we got on, and John had asked me, and I said, when did you do, $1 million a year, $3 million a year, or some benchmark that people would be impressed with? And then you look back from a dollar amount, you look back in 1975, average dentist was doing $50,000 a year. Not too impressive. It's kind of hard for a young doctor in dental school, someone that just got out, or someone's working and are going to own their own practice, for that to relate. But the percentages have changed the same. So they've been the same. So if I were going to list things that people should be doing, one would be diagnosing your practice, but also using, not necessarily this yellow card, but I created an income expense template.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've got a copy, John. If you don't, I'll send it to you. And maybe you can make that available to your viewers. Because the neat thing about it, in addition to having you look on single page about, I don't know, I think there's probably 12, maybe 14 of these KPIs. On the right side of the page is the goal, the percentage that you would normally see on this yellow card. And again, in diagnosing this, I think most of us will always come up a little short of what we expected it to be. I know I do. I think the reality of knowing that allows us to organize our life and our practice to do better tomorrow than you did today. And again, some people are turned off when they listen to a doctor that has a very large practice. They're going, oh, I'll never be able to do that. So in that book I wrote on the super general dental practice, the point wasn't the dollar amount, it was the percentage. So I'm fine if you do $500,000 a year and you save 20%, and your patients love you, and you love what doing, your life is balanced, and your overhead is good, and your patients refer. And now that's not a destination for most people because everybody's been there, but if they're doing things right, you can't help but grow. I think it's funny, doctors, I was talking one time and a doctor goes, well, how many new patients do you have a month? I said, well, that's not really important. I kept putting it off, and the guy just kept bugging me. And so I told him 250 to 300 new patients a month. Now, that is a scary number without the rest of the story.
Right.
Okay. I started out with no patients. I worked for 2 doctors, got fired from one office because all the patients wanted to see me, and there weren't that many patients. And then I worked for another doctor who was going to retire, didn't retire. And then I opened my own practice, and I had an average number, 20 to 30. But I worked at trying to do better from a consumer standpoint, and like giving patients more than they expected, looking, what's the word? Remarkable. Looking remarkable in the eyes of a client. And in dentistry, looking remarkable to your potential clients is pretty easy because the bar is set pretty low. So again, you'll know that you're doing things right if people keep coming back and spending money with you. So
well, let me stop you there, because what I heard you say, and I think is really important for everybody who's watching, is what if you looked at your practice as if you were going to buy it? And you mentioned too, the metrics, the numbers, some of you, you're producing, I don't know, $700,000 a year. Some are doing like $2 or $3 million. It really, I found it doesn't really matter. In fact, I had to talk a lot of doctors off the ledge. I don't know if I told you this when you and I were working together with Summit, but they were so caught up in matching your numbers, and I was like, stop it, just stop. Like, some people can do that, but I'd say that's very, very few. What we want here is to become not just productive, but we want to become profitable. We want to make sure that no matter what you're taking home or whatever you're producing, that in the card that you're holding up there, Mike, that's got a list of percentages of how you should operate in your expenditures, right? Where the money should go, so that you're able to keep at least 45-50% of your overhead, or over your revenue. And when we look at it that way, and we hold that up next to, okay, well, what is the picture of my practice that, like, if I were to buy today, what would that look like? Then we go, okay, well, sometimes, yes, we need to ramp up production and collections, but sometimes we need to make some important decisions to make sure that we're freeing up our dollars to, you talk about cash flow all the time. People talk about profit and loss, and then like, okay, well, that's cool, but like, what kind of cash flow do you actually have? And I think you made an important, statement there. Many of dentists are getting their profit and loss statement way after the fact. It's like, 60 days after, and it's hard to make decisions, when you're getting the information 60 days later. It's easy to go back and go, well, shoot, I should never have done that. But it's harder to make a real-time decision of, okay, well, where am I right now? What can I do? So as we get into, and you open the door perfectly for, okay, getting into that current reality. And you even mentioned, like, the KPI that you're looking at is not necessarily, and I had a question for you. I'll start with this question, and then we can get into like what you're looking at, okay? Because more often than not these days, I find that people have some sort of dashboard on their computer. Okay, it's like this, and I won't name a whole lot of names, but it's, basically a data mining, dashboard. It's like going into your practice software, and it's like, okay, these are the most important information. And what I've found over the years is a lot of doctors are sitting there looking at the production per hour, and they're looking at that, hoping that it's this or that or the other, looking at the hygienist production per hour. But in my opinion, and I'd love to get yours, like, most of those dashboards, they really don't help you make good decisions in your practice. Now, I'm not going to say you can't make any good decisions, but some of the most important decisions can't be made from a dashboard like that. Talk to me on, what do you think about that? That's just my humble opinion. What do you think about?
No, I agree completely. And you have to keep in mind that most of these companies that push data mining over your software, I mean, well, one, the data's there. And you're paying $2,000 a month to have somebody data mine it? Are you kidding me? Just learn your software. But But again, it's kind of like my wife giving directions. And I love my
She
wife.
gives great directions, doesn't she?
Yeah, but I'm driving and she goes, okay, turn right back there. And I'm going, you got to you got to tell me before we've already passed the corner, and she never gets that right. And I'm going, I see doctors waiting on that P&L thinking that a profit and loss statement is profit and loss, because it's not. It doesn't have your debt on there. And so a lot of times we need, it's like you're at war and I need real time data, and then I need to act on it. Okay, so we have different doctors doing different things. The one that just waits to have someone tell you how bad it was, but we're already 2 months and probably you're repeating yourself and you haven't, you can't catch up. And then there's those that maybe we sit down and show them the data and they won't act on it. They got to wait till they have more data and more data. And so in that income expense sheet, it in a way makes you stop looking at things you don't need to look at, really. It makes the main thing, and the things we're looking at cover a variety. It's kind of like a pyramid. You're looking at this one number, but it affects all this other stuff down below the pyramid. And so if you saw that number having a problem, you can always go down and look and see what affected that. But people are looking at the wrong things. I mean, when's the last time that you walked into an office and someone said, you asked them, what is your production per op per month, or production per employee per month? No one ever looks at that.
Right.
But, let's say that was the only data we had, production per employee per month. And our goal was 20 to 25,000 per employee, but theirs was 8,000. Are they ever going to have anything else in their numbers do well with that type of production? No, ever, never. And so if you dumb this down, and it has to be dumb for me. I mean, and I started noticing the more I studied the intricacies of consumerism and accounting and wealth and all this, it really comes down to some really basic tenets that if you know those, you're going to do better than 90% of the doctors out there. And again, I'm not suggesting you be fee for service. I'm not suggesting take insurance. I'm not suggesting that you have to do $2 million a year. What I'm saying is we can get all of this in balance, and then you choose what you want to do. You now are the dog instead of the tail. And for me, I remember times where I felt like I was the tail and I didn't have control, and that stressed me. And I this is taking back it in a way. If you do the things that John's talking about, you're making decisions and acting on them now that will rewrite your future.
Right.
And I'm in the future, real close to my use before date. And I know, because you don't know that you did a pretty good job. I mean, you were competitive, but you don't really know until you can look back 40 or 50 years and go, I'm really glad I made that sacrifice or that decision, or I'm glad I didn't repeat what I did that didn't do well. And so it's hard when you're talking to a young doctor or someone that's doing pretty good, how important it is to keep their fingers on the steering wheel, their foot on the gas and brake, and make wise choices. So,
yeah. Well, and I think some of you watching maybe going, well, how do I do that? And I want to address something that you said that is so important. And, first of all, how many of you are thinking to yourself, man, I do feel like the tail. I want to be the dog, right. But one of the things you said was that, and I asked you about the data mining software.
Right.
I can't tell you how many doctors that I know that they'll look at me and go, I don't even know how to run these reports. How do you even get these reports? And I want to camp on that just for a second, but not, I don't want to spend too much time, but you got to remember that like all of your practice software salespeople are trying to wow you with their wares, right? They're trying to go, hey, look at it, it can do this, it can do that, and that, and I've got a couple that I like, and I'm just going to say them, Dentrix and EagleSoft. I mean, and I know there's more out there, and there's probably something that will be better, but a lot of these newer softwares, they're just like, okay, well, we're cloud-based, and they have no dental experience. They're just throwing stuff in there. But, but even those two that I just named, they don't do what I think, and what Mike you've taught me is necessary to really to give information, because they don't even provide this information for you. They have it in there. You mentioned the production per employee. Well, they don't know how many employees you have, so they're not sitting there going, well, here's your number, right? But it would be simple if you could learn a few things to really grab the steering wheel, like you said, and go, okay, now I'm going to use some actionable data that makes a difference versus, oh, hey, look at this new kind of spreadsheet that we have, or this new, like, whatever. So let's dive into, because one of the things I love about you, and one of the things that I think is important when we do these videos, is let's dive into the actionable stuff. Like, what are the things like that you're thinking, okay, we need to look at these things so that we can have a better idea of how to make 2025 the best, and not just, not the best ever, but we're going to start that trajectory. You mentioned earlier, some doctors are excited about 6 to 7% a year, but that's not cutting it these days. Okay. We need an increase of, over 15 to 20 or more percent to really achieve our dreams. But what are the actual numbers or areas of the practice that you think are most important to look at when we talk about our current reality?
Okay. Well, I tend to group this in two groups.
Okay.
One is data that comes from the expenditure side. Now, again, I don't want to go into depth about a profit and loss statement and how it's not a great financial sheet to look at to make financial decisions, because we're really looking for something more like a cash flow statement, where, like, you remember in college, we just had a checkbook, and we put money in and we wrote checks, and then we could tell if we still had money. Yeah. We knew what we spent, and we knew what our expenses were. Well, we don't have that today with the way we do this. So I tend to take financial numbers, which again would be in your profit and loss or that arena, and then also numbers from your practice management software. And so there's 6 or 7 numbers in each of these two groups. And then I put them on the sheet of paper, and this will scare everybody off. I share those numbers with my team. All of them. Okay, so we won't talk about that today. Right. Okay, but you might as well share it with yourself, because you're not looking at this. And then maybe we can discuss just 1 or 2 ways, the first action steps you need to take to go down that road. So I'm just going to take the yellow card. I don't have a copy of that sheet, but I wrote it. I remember it. Okay. So the first one was kind of something that you would take off of your profit and loss statement, or whatever you're using to do the finances, and that would be, those numbers. So I'm just going to start at the top and run down. We need new patients. Okay. Yeah. Now, again, we know what an average practice is. It's about 20 to 25 new patients per month. Now, in an average practice, just so we have something to compare this, an anchor to look back at, is an average practice, 20, 25 new patients a month. They have 1 front desk, 1 assistant, 1 hygienist, and maybe 1 other person that's a girl Friday that could work chairside or help at the front desk too. So maybe 4 people, with the doctor. Okay. They do about $700,000 a year, 650 to 750, right in that range. Their overhead 72%. So in that practice, when we talk about new patients, and we got 20 to 30, most practices work Monday through Thursday, the equivalent of 4 8-hour work days. And that'd be 16 days a month. So if a practice is doing about 30 new patients, they were at the top of average. That hygienist gets about 2 new patients per month. That doctor gets about 2 new patients per month. Okay. And then hopefully we move past that. Okay. So the number is important, but even more important is where they came from. And this is something that none of the softwares I know of track. And that is the number of direct referrals you get from existing patients. There is no number or no percentage that represents how well you're doing in the arena as direct referrals. If you have, I'm sorry?
Because they aren't putting it in there, right? Yep. It's one, the software doesn't know where they come from.
Well, they don't know anything about dentistry anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, the software was an accounting software back when we did, I mean, I remember when Easy Dental, Fred Garris used our office as a beta site to do Easy Dental. He didn't know anything about dentistry. So I'd have to tell him what these numbers were and what they meant. The trouble with your CPA is he doesn't know anything about dentistry. He knows about tax accounting, and he doesn't know the effect of these numbers going up and down. So you have to understand at least the basics of these 12 or 14 numbers and percentages so you can help the people that help you give you the data you need to make decisions. Okay, so you need at least 50% from direct referrals.
Yep.
If you've got 20%, then there's a problem. And keep in mind, it's easy for you to look. Just have a sheet of paper. Where do these patients come from? Okay, could be external marketing. You know, your sign of a postcard, of a pay-per-click ad, whatever it is. Okay, you have internal referrals, and that would be your direct referrals. And then you sign up for insurance. If you're a network, you have people coming from there. It's really funny because I'll see somebody look, and I said, okay, let's take the people that you get from insurance. Let's say they had 30, and 15 of them were from insurance. Okay, so now we got 15 left. And then we had some external marketing that got 10 of them in. And then we had 5 from direct referrals. Now let's look at the money you spent.
There you go.
That money was used to spend on the external marketing. So you might have 10 people come from external marketing, and you're paying $1,000 per new patient. Wouldn't it be great if these people were they became raving fans and they loved you so much they couldn't help but tell everybody about you? Okay, so new patients is one. Your production per employee. Now, I make an error, and John would probably point this out later, but I tend to use the word collection and production interchangeably. You cannot do that unless you collect 100% or more every month, every year, and we do. And every practice I've never had something, below that. So, but most people don't collect that. So we want to look at net adjusted production that after adjustments, after the adjustments from insurance or senior citizens discounts, whatever it is, what you could actually collect.
Right.
Okay. So let's say you've got you do $100,000 a month, and you had 5 employees. Do the math for us there. What's the production per employee?
Is the 100,000 is adjusted production?
Yeah.
What you're saying? Yeah. So it's 20,000.
20,000. And our goal is 20 to 25. But the average practice is going to be close to 13,000. Now, I'm not saying that average is bad. It just means if you do that average, you're not going to have any money left over. You're going to have a very high overhead. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's important. We have a tendency as dentists to throw money at things, and throwing money means hiring staff that don't produce, or hiring somebody to clean instruments when the hygienist or assistant ought to be able to do that during their busy day. I'm sorry. And then buy more instruments. They don't get, sick. They show up, the instruments do. Don't have to worry about that aspect. Production per op per month, using that net adjusted production, should be 25 to 30,000. Again, the average is below 14 for an average practice. Now, you can eke out a good living. Okay. In other words, in an average practice, you could take home a couple $100,000 a year, which, if we compare it to the rest of jobs in the United States, that's a really good hourly living.
Yeah.
It's not a benchmark that you're at capacity in dentistry. And it certainly is if you have a bell curve, it'd be way down on the left-hand side as not being very, very cool. I mean, you'd want to try to get more and strive for more. I think the problem is we're discussing this because if, let's say, a staff person's watching it or a young doctor, they're thinking, well, this guy only thinks about money. Well, I mean, and John knows that at one point, somebody introduced me to God. I went home, put a 45 in my mouth, pulled the trigger. Okay, now, and we all have these stories, But I look at money as a benchmark because we need something quantitatively to tell where we are in this game. I mean, if we're in football, we look at the score, right? Okay. I don't look at money as the goal. I look at money as a reflection of the amount of service we render to our patients. Okay, so I don't want people to start off listening to this and go and just tune out and go, all they do is think about money. Okay, good. As I say, it doesn't matter how much you do. Okay, so employee per month, op per month, number of new patients, hygiene production.
Yep.
Okay, they should generate about 33% of the total collections in your practice or total net adjusted production. Now, on this sheet of paper, we're talking about that income expense deal.
Yep.
At the bottom, it has a line item that says, I need everybody to learn what 1% in your practice is on a yearly basis. So if we had $1 million practice, that would be $10,000. Since we're looking at percentages, I need you to know what each 1% above or beyond that affects the bottom line. So in this example, so I can keep this in my head, and $1 million a year is $83,333 a month. Okay. In $1 million practice, 1% is $10,000. So if we were talking about hygiene and we wanted it to be 33, but they were doing 30% instead of 33, then we're $30,000. We're going to collect $30,000 less than we actually should have with the same office, the facility, the same number of employees, the same effort. You know, that's just not going to make everything work out well for you. So each one of these benchmarks, set a standard. You may not hit that, but then you go back and look. Let's say they only do 25%. Well, why are they not? Okay, one could be they're not doing comprehensive hygiene. They're not diagnosing, scaling, replanning.
Right.
Two, we talk about average practice having 20 to 30 new patients a month. If you've got 2 hygienists, you're going to need about 60 new patients. So they still have about 20 to 30 new patients a month for each one of them. If they don't have that, they can't produce at that level. So it's a discussion for a different time, but I need you to understand that each one of these represent how I look at practices to buy, how I look at practices to see what's good and what's bad. And one of the good things, if you're falling short here, when I look at buying a practice, I'm okay if they fall short in these areas. Yeah. Because after the sale, I can improve that. So if you're self-diagnosing yourself, the good thing about finding where you're not doing well is tomorrow you can focus on that where yesterday you didn't even know that was a challenge. You just looked at the bottom line and you didn't and I know I've said this before, doctors tend to look at symptoms rather than the real problem, the smoke rather than the fire. Okay. So next one would be collection rate. I mean, we mentioned it already, collection rate. Okay. At least 98% or above. But it's possible to have over 100% collection ratio.
Yeah. And you mentioned the percentage, and I just want to just reiterate that for a second, because I think as doctors, it's easy for us to want to internalize all of this stuff and really keep it from our teams.
Right.
But like when a office manager runs a report and their practice software says, man, we've got 96% collection rate, they're thinking, great. Yeah. That's what they're thinking. But it's not great, because each of those points, again, to your point, if it's $1 million practice, they're 20,000 at least behind, if not $40,000 behind on all the collections for the year. And so it really comes down to, we want as a team to have a great experience. We want to feel good, right?
Right.
But when you're secretly behind the scenes stressed out because you're missing $20,000, like, help yourself out, help the team out too, because I know every team member that I've ever come across that can even hold their weight, they want to know they're doing a good job. They want to have that confidence, and more than they do want to hear it from you. Absolutely, that's a different Zoom altogether. Right. But they need to be able to look and see, oh, I absolutely am doing a good job. But didn't mean to cut you off, but you were talking about collection percentage. Talk about that for us.
Well, I mean, it's just, it's all about net.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Doesn't matter what you produce. I see doctors that are, and again, we were a fee for service practice for like 25 years, but at some point we started, we were insurance driven because the demographics, and a lot of people have this demographic denial that they can be fee for service in an area where it's 80% insurance driven and everybody's young, and the commoditization of healthcare is basically, and we've done this to ourselves, is basically made patients think of a cleaning's a cleaning, crown's a crown. And if they ever start to believe that, then the only way to choose a dentist is by price. And I thought it's really funny when I talk to fee-for-service doctors, and it's great if you can do it, but it requires a very charismatic doctor that has a high skill level, and then the team and everything else in the right location. And, everybody, the fee-for-service people feel like, well, everybody's going to beat their door to, beat down the door for me to go to a fee-for-service doctor. Yet those doctors buy medical insurance that's a PPO.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a double standard here. So
yeah.
Price and convenience is always going to be part of this equation. And so what I'm hoping as we discuss these, this is like looking at an iceberg. Okay. You go, well, that iceberg isn't that damn big. Okay. But we're not looking under the water.
Right.
Okay. And that's kind of what you see when you look at other practices. You tend to see the good things like cars parked outside and they look busy.
Right.
But underneath, you're looking like debt and staff turnover and all this other stuff. But if we can give you a set of things to look at, now you understand how to score the game. It's like a scorecard on your when you go play golf, or for a pilot that's getting into a plane. He has a checklist he has to go down. This is a real short checklist that you can look at, but you still don't understand the breadth and width of what these numbers affect, because we don't have time to discuss this. But hopefully we can, in other things we talk about, we can reference back to this and do it. So what I'm hoping is if we do this and then they email you and request that income expense statement, that everybody goes, well, what should I do first? Have good numbers. Actually know the facts. Okay. Because I talk to doctors all the time and said, how long does it take you to do a crown prep? Oh, about 40, 50 minutes. And the staff saying it's an hour and a half. Or I said, well, how many new patients did you have? Oh, we have 40 or 50. It was 19. I just know where you are. It's like this was last year, but I took my grandkids to Disney World. Know where you are, because I was constantly lost, right? I mean, they have apps on your phone and crap, but they still have the little kiosks that says you are here.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other deals that way. Okay. Yeah. That's what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
Helping you diagnose yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll put a complete list together. I know we don't have a lot of time to continue on, but we're going to do more of these, right? But let me just ask the question for the ones, those of you watching, like how many of y'all were listening to Mike? We talked about the collection percentage, the hygiene production, the production per employee, production per op, the new patients and direct referrals. Like, I hope that you got the sense at least that maybe you need to do some digging in your practice.
Right.
Maybe there's a way, and easier than you thought, right? Because I know that there's so many reports that you can generate out of your software, but a lot of the stuff is stuff that you can find out using a little bit of software and a little bit of your brain here, doing a little bit of math. Some of that math that my kids tell me all the time, I'm never going to use this. I'll use a little bit of it, all right? But I think that if we can get clear on these things, it answers questions like, well, do I need to hire in the new year? Do I need to let some people go? Or do I need to increase my production collection so that I can keep these people? Can I do raises? Do I need to stay the same? What about a bonus system, which we haven't really talked about? But I think when you have these numbers, I've seen this all over. I've seen dentists come alive because now they're not just looking at numbers on a page. They're looking at, and you said this, earlier because, you know, you were like, well, I don't want everybody to feel like we're all about just numbers and dollars,
Yeah.
right? But if you don't pay attention to those things, especially in relationship to your practice, and even going back to what we said in the beginning was looking at your practice like, what if I bought this today? Because here's the deal. You're going to want to sell your practice probably sooner than you think you will. I mean, that's what I've seen. I've seen doctors that are like, all of a sudden, you know, they wanted to practice into their 70s, but something happens, a health thing, you know, a daughter has a kid in another state, and now your wife is like, we need to move, all these things, right? But if you don't start looking at that right now, even at a time where you like, I don't have any desire to sell my practice, then how are you going to know what to do in order to build your practice up to something that you want to be able to sell at a good price when you retire? And more importantly, as you move forward, how are you going to save for your future so that you don't have to rely on the sale of your practice so that you can actually, you know, make a, you know, have a good retirement. But we're gonna provide you. I'm gonna put my email on the in the comments here, and y'all can email me. You can request, and I'm gonna get a picture of that card too. I know I've got one laying around here, but I'll get a picture of that card, and we'll give you that card too. But you can email me for the expense, and what was it, the income and
Income and
expense.
expense template.
Yeah. And then we'll give you the card too. But stay tuned. One of the things that I'm excited for, we're going to start tackling some myths in dentistry. And that's going to be kind of where we're going next, because there was a lot of ideas from people like, well, I got to be this, I got to do that, I got to buy this AI, I got to buy this, CT scanner, I got to hire the right person, I have to have the right new patient in order to actually succeed in my dental practice. But we're going to start tackling those very soon here. So stay tuned here. Mike, thank you so much for spending time this morning. I know we didn't, you know what we did? We touched the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
We got that tip of the iceberg, and we're going to dive into it a little bit more. So I'm excited for it. So y'all have a good day, and we'll see you next time.